pleasant good morning. Again, we're going to be a little redundant. We're having a little technical problem. But guess what? Holland can solve this thing. It's because I've got good people around me. When I used to fly for Antilles airboats and the engines quit, I always used to have the mechanics fly with me in the beginning when they did the maintenance of the aircraft. And I have Ducks Cold here. And by the way, everybody, you are on 93.5. And what we're going to do this morning is we're going to confuse you with the facts. And, you know, Holland likes to do that all the time. Whether we like it or not, we have to deal with what we have to deal with. We have Donald Ducks Cold, who is the director of the Public Service Commission. Am I correct, sir?
Yes, sir. Let me say good morning to you and the people of the Virgin Islands.
Do you want to tell everybody we used to be colleagues?
I serve in the legislature. I serve 3 terms in the legislature. You serve 5 terms, correct?
No. Come on, give me. I was there for 6 terms.
6 terms.
They had to put up with me for 6 terms. Would you imagine that?
Yes. And your contributions were immeasurable. So.
Well, you're trying to get an easy interview. That's why you're saying that.
Well, as you open the station, the broadcast, we say we're dealing with the facts.
Right.
And that is what we are here to deal with. I want to thank you for having me here and thank the
TV6.
TV6
right.
for
the
being
Community
here.
Access Channel, yeah.
Yes. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Services Commission. I was appointed by Governor Mapp. So I want to thank him and Lieutenant Governor Potter for having confidence in me and placing me at the helm of that agency. And we know that the Public Services Commission is a quasi-judicial body.
Well, I don't know whether they do know that, but that's what I want them to listen to is how you have to operate with the context, within the context of the Virgin Islands Code.
Yeah, well, Title 30 is our enabling legislation. It sets out that we have a 7-member board, 2 ex officio members. We have 3 from St. Thomas, 3 from St. John, 3 from St. Croix, and 1 from St. John. As a matter of fact, as a commission is constituted right now, we have 3 members from St. Croix. We have Commissioner Clendenin, Commissioner Hughes, and Commissioner Williams. 1 from St. John, Commissioner Rutnick, and we don't have any members from the island district of St. Thomas, the island of St. Thomas, and that's been so for about 6 to 8 years. It's very difficult to get individuals to serve on the commission. And I think I have a couple of names that I got to take to Governor Mapp because we need to have the commission fully staffed, fully
formed.
Yeah, fully formed, because we are having serious difficulties getting a quorum. Sometimes we have commissioners calling in from out of the territory just to establish a quorum. So it is, and the job of the commission is very important. Believe it or not, every decision that is made by the commission affects the entire territory, everyone in the territory. Title 30 gives us the authority to set rates, setting rates, and that's the only authority we have is setting rates. And rates are set where the utilities that we manage, that we regulate, which I want to say we regulate WAPA, Innovative, the ferry boats,
Service,
and rate setting for Waste Management Authority. And in setting the rate, the rate gives a return to the company to carry out the mandate that they do.
Correct.
So WAPA provides electricity. They produce electricity. So they have to get a return to make sure that they can produce electricity. And that is done through what we call the LEAC, the Levelized Energy Adjustment Clause, which is the cost of fuel, and the base rate, which is the cost of everything else.
Right.
The wires, the line, the poles, employee, maintenance, insurance, bond issues that they float. So that base rate is there. So the LEAC is made up of those 2. I mean, the bill is made up of those 2 entities, the base rate and the LEAC.
All right, let me kind of interrupt you because I want to do a discussion with you. I want them to understand, one, your experience. When you were in the legislature, you were an ex officio member, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were to look at your background with reference to this particular role you have right now, nobody could say that you do not have the knowledge and understanding of the process of rate making. Am I correct?
Well, you said nobody can say it. People do say it.
Well, of course they say it. When the rates go up, they say it.
Yes, I do have knowledge and understanding. I attended rate school while I was on the commission.
Right.
So I served ex officio and also served as a member.
A voting member.
I served there for 10 years.
Right.
Also chaired the commission and have the knowledge and understanding of what it takes to make rates.
All right. Why do you think, let's explore this. Why do you think the public does not quite understand what your role is? Why don't you explain your role, particularly in establishing rates? And again, these areas where there is always obviously when there are rate increase, nobody argues when there's a rate decrease, do they?
No, they don't.
No, I haven't heard anybody. And I want them to understand your relationship of that process, how that process works, and that if you make a decision either way, for or against, you are accountable to the courts of the United States Virgin Islands.
Yes. As I stated earlier, we are quasi-judicial, means that we sit as a judge, a body that's judging, and we judge evidence.
Impartial.
Impartial, and we have to have a balance, and that's the key. The commission cannot allow the utility to go bankrupt. But the commission also have to make sure that the rates that are put in place are prudent and in the best interest of the ratepayers. The utility doesn't have any competition. No. So the commission, in setting the rate, provide that balance in terms of...
It means out there that they are a monopoly.
Yes.
Right.
Okay? So the commission have to set those rates. Now, in rate setting, the utility provides to the commission the cost of doing business. And the cost, again, as we started out talking about...
But the cost of the process as well. We're talking about the process that you go through to establish the rate, whether it's acceptable or not acceptable to the community. You have a tremendous amount of cost. You have experts besides yourself on the commission and you as director that do tremendous amount of studies, am I correct? And the utility has to pay for those.
Yeah, we have consultants that do the technical work.
Is Georgetown still with you?
Georgetown Consulting is still the consultants to the commission.
Okay.
Do an excellent job.
Right.
And they have to be paid, and the utility pays. Well, the ratepayers pay that.
Well, indirectly, everybody out there, yes, the bill comes to you, and it's rolled into the base rate, isn't it?
It's rolled into the base rate.
The rate that just went up.
Yes.
Okay.
And WAPA also have their experts.
Sure.
And their experts have to be paid. So we have to look at these. The expert of WAPA versus the expert of the public service system, and we have to bring a balance to that.
The clash of the two giants.
Yes,
but generally, the utility, am I correct, in many cases will dole out all sorts of money to, in fact, support their position. Am I correct?
Very much so.
And in many respects, it's like two porcupines making love, very carefully, right? Between your experts and theirs, and that's where ultimately the decision is made by the board.
Right, by the commission, yes.
Right. You don't make the decision.
No, I don't make the decision. I don't have a vote.
No.
The commission makes that decision once presented with the staff report.
Right.
And that staff report delineates how they arrive at a rate. And I hold here in my hand, and I mean, this thing is very technical.
Sure, I know.
And it goes on, and if, you can show close up, and they break everything down. And how this thing, the LEAC, is formed, Sir Redfield, the Levelized Energy Adjustment Clause is paid to kilowatt hours. How many BTUs does it take to generate 1 kilowatt?
Right.
And we're talking technical stuff. BTU is the British thermal unit that measures heat. So the heat rate that it causes to burn at, how much of that does it take to generate 1 kilowatt? And then when you have that 1 kilowatt now, there's a cost associated with it. So if it takes 1 kilowatt and it takes 5 cents to generate 1 kilowatt,
Right.
then that is how the LEAC is formed, and that is how you're charged.
Right. I think the best way is that you put a value on that kilowatt.
Yes.
Okay. So everybody knows that it takes so much fuel when the Virgin Islands is using totally X amount of kilowatts.
Right.
And that is the value
Right.
that is established that you out there that pay your utility bill has to pay.
And that is how we do it across the spectrum. And then you have a business rate and a commercial rate. So if you use 100 kilowatts,
Right.
and it's 5 cents per kilowatt hour, you multiply 5 times that, and then you get your rate.
But maybe they don't understand, and it is the distribution of the responsibility. And I want everybody to clearly understand, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'm right. For the sake of rate making, you divide or you decide whether the commercial rate versus the private rate should be subsidized, right?
Yes.
In other words, obviously the commercial rate is higher. In this most recent case, I think it's what, 14 cents for the private, or 14.5 cents, and what, 19 for the commercial rate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in rate making, the commercial entities utilize the utility far more than the residential.
Yes.
I know on St. Thomas, you have always heard people say that we air condition the sidewalks down Main Street. Because these businesses use power, and at the peak throughout the day when it is hot, you have to air condition those stores. So they are using mass amount of power.
Sure.
Versus a residential user who goes to work, they're not at home in the day. Basically, when they come back home, or early in the morning, or when they come back home in the evening, is when they use a lot of power.
Right. But it's a decision on your part, and that is the part of the distribution of the rate. Is it, why should the private homeowner being paid for air conditioning the roads or the sidewalks? Am I correct? So it is a fair way to look at it. However, when you look at the business sector, they're also the engine for the economy, and they seem to be far more sensitive to these increases because it's a cost of doing business. And if that is the case, if you're going to the grocery store or you're going to A.H. Reese or whoever, then you are in fact being paid. You in fact are paying for it.
Yes.
Because they added on to the cost of your grocery.
Exactly.
Right.
That
Everybody
cost
understand
can be passed on
Right.
to the consumer.
And rest assured,
It is.
if there is a increase or as a result of some, like the cost of energy going down, they are less apt to reflect that immediately than they are to reflect the increase.
Definitely.
Why do you think that is, Mr. Director? I mean, you've got to give Holland a little education on this stuff.
Why do the ratepayers make noise when it goes up and doesn't?
Well, we're not only talking about what they are paying, but it is reflected in the market. Particularly the sensitive part is, again, the buying of groceries.
Right.
Or how about the purchase of fuel? We're talking about gasoline. I am merely saying when this increase takes place, that particular business will reflect that immediately.
Immediately.
And that means that they will either go up on their gas prices or they will go up on their food prices.
Yeah.
And what I was saying to you, it is amazing to me that if there is a reduction, particularly on the LEAC, you see them less responsive to the decrease in their LEAC.
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
price stays the same.
Stays the same. You're absolutely correct. The price doesn't go down. When the price of oil plummeted, we see the price of gas. When it was up, the price of gas went up.
Correct.
When it plummeted, the price of gas still stayed up.
Of course.
Didn't come down. And if it came down incrementally, not to the price as the wholesale was increased or was decreased.
The regulatory body, now, they don't do it in food pricing. They do it in food prices by the way we run the market, meaning the private market is supposedly supposed to reflect these things. But when it comes to fuel, it is the same thing. When the fuel goes up, the gasoline station will raise it immediately, and when it goes down,
it take a while to bring it down.
They're yawning.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And that's what I do is consumer education.
Right.
Because if you have the market is competitive, unless there's collusion, you got to go and look for the cheap price.
Correct.
You got to look for the cheap price. You have to shop around and look for the cheap price. So the competition, if I don't want to be spending money for inventory. I want my inventory to go out so I can recoup and go back and get that. So
but
you do that.
You also do education of, again, let's say the WAPA consumer. They do it and you do it. You do it as well. You should be as energy efficient as you possibly can.
Very much
right?
so.
Right.
Very much so.
Now, with this major change from fossil fuels, and they did make a decision to go to propane, we'll get into that later. You have so many of the businesses and private people going offline. How does that affect, again, the utility? Because we have a principle called plant in future use. It's part of the rate process. Right. Remember, for everybody out there, unfortunately, Holland served as chairman of the Public Service Commission, all right? And I went through NAROC, and I went to school, and all the damn things. But in any event, I want the public to understand that this is a challenge for the utility as well as yourselves, because anybody with any brains out there are trying to get off the line. But all the investment that they made in the past, just like the phone company, has all these wires hanging around here, and we have what? We have these
wireless phones.
Right, and they are still paying for this. How do you approach this issue? Because as these folks continually go off online, like Pleasant right now is, I think they're offline. They've got a generator, and my God, what does that do to the rates?
As difficult as it is to say.
I know what you're going to say. Everybody, castor oil, be close to a restaurant.
Rates now fall on the consumer, the homeowner.
That still is plugged in.
That is using that.
Right.
And remember, WAPA has a bond that they have to, and they have to have coverage. To pay the debt service on bonds that they went to the market for.
Which they did many years ago.
Yeah. And they're losing customers now. And we're talking about the big customers. They're not losing you and I who can go in and get we're talking about hotels.
Right. Grocery stores.
Grocery stores that go off the market. They use huge amount of energy.
Right.
So now who is left to pay the rate? You and I, the homeowner. Or the smaller businesses left to pay the rate.
Okay, let's you and I take a break. Everybody take a break out there. We'll be back in again. You're on Caribbean Country 93.5, and we're on with the PSC.
More Straight Talk with Holland Redfield.
All right, and we are back out there, you happy campers. And what we're trying to do is walk you through this process of rate making. And I've got the director of the Public Service Commission here today. It was an honor for me to have him here because I am so happy that he realizes that he certainly has to explain this. And we have had a previous interview, I guess, almost a year ago.
Yes.
And again, I know whatever we say, is not necessarily going to make you happy, okay? But you're going to know why these things happen. And if there is any help that the Public Service Commission needs, like, for instance, legislation to broaden their mandate or whatever, you will know that that is your responsibility at that time to be talking to your legislators. Now, let's go over the rate, exactly what took place. We went over how you did it in the methodology to the best of our ability. But the results of the decision were made on these determinations and these investigations on both sides. But talk to me exactly what is the new rates, both private and commercial.
Okay. The LEAC.
Right.
The commission made a decision to remove all other costs from the LEAC.
Right. To separate everybody.
Because the commission wants the ratepayer to know that since WAPA have now converted from number 2, number 6, and number 2 oil to LPG, what that actual cost is. So there is nothing else in the LEAC other than the cost of fuel.
It's pure and clean. That is all you are paying for.
Yeah, pure and clean. And within the LEAC, before we cleaned it up, we had the LPG costs.
Right.
And the management cost of that.
Integrated into it. So you had one bill which could be very confusing for you, right?
Right.
Now to make sure it wasn't confusing to the ratepayer, you separated it.
Separated it. The last LEAC that was in place was at 19 cents per kilowatt hour.
Right.
With the taking away of all of these other costs, the LEAC was reduced to 14 cents. So we're down to 14 cents now. It's the lowest it's been for decades. But that cost was now transferred into the base rate. And remember what we talked about, the base rate was the cost of everything.
Everything.
And within that base rate, Mr. Redfield, the LPG infrastructure that was put in place by WAPA, those tanks and all of that, which was
extremely costly. And there
Vital was the company who did that work, and they did and paid for it up front. Started out as $87 million. Within the contract, once they had substantial completion, meaning that the plants are now using LPG, we now have to start paying that.
Correct.
And that is what that cost was transferred to the base rate.
Right. But that fuel cost will be reflected in the LEAC.
Yeah, the fuel cost is in the LEAC. And that's why you see that reduction, because propane is cheaper than number 2 and number 6 oil. So you see that reduction in the cost, which WAPA did say we will see a reduction in our fuel costs. But when we shift now, Mr. Redfield, we're now gone to the base rate. So that cost now to pay for the infrastructure is now in the base rate, and that's where you saw that increase.
And who do you think is paying for that?
The ratepayers.
Okay.
Now, the ratepayer is going to pay for it.
Can I further clarify the difference between the base rate and the LEAC?
Right.
Everybody out there listen to Holland for what it's worth. You have an automobile. And to get the automobile to the gas station, you need fuel. When you buy that fuel, that would be equivalent to the LEAC.
To the LEAC.
Now, to get it there, you have to keep the engine running. You have to go ahead and you have to have oil in it. You have to maintain it. You have to do a check on your car every 3,000 or 5,000 miles. So for you out there to understand this process, as painful as it may be, the way the Public Service Commission approached this was to make it as simple as possible for you to understand, whether you liked it or not, of how this thing is working. Now, why was there we'll move on, why was there such a pressure to increase the base rate? And talk to me about the decisions that the utility makes that you cannot make because you are a regulator. You don't run them.
Right. The utility, based on Title 30 and interpretation by the court, has a board, and the board makes a decision, and that decision is carried out by the executive director.
Right. And we're talking about WAPA now.
WAPA. We're talking about WAPA.
Everybody. Right.
Yeah.
They're an independent.
So a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, the utility decided, because of the cost of fuel at that time. Remember back then, LEAC was upward about 45 to 50 cents a kilowatt. You remember that?
Absolutely. It actually was the biggest sucking sound that you could hear in the Virgin Islands. It sucked the breath out of the economy.
Yes. So the utility decided that they were going to switch from fuel oil to LPG. But there was a cost in putting that in.
Right.
So they enter into a decision and a contract with Vital. Vital would bill it, finance it, and then the utility would pay for it over a period of time.
That's you out there. You would pay for it.
So this decision was not made by the PSC.
No, I understand that.
It wasn't made by the PSC. But based on our regulatory authority, we have to now look at it and see whether the cost is prudent or not.
Yeah, but you went through the process while you were watching this going on because you were aware that there were original bids, there were change orders, and the original price, and there was an opening there to be massively increased.
But what has happened, and
that's what you're dealing with now on the base rate.
On the base rate, started out at $87 million. We've just received another contract from WAPA where the price has gone to $160 million.
Right.
Again, I want the public to understand these decisions were made by WAPA and its board.
They were unilateral decisions, and if you tried to put yourself in the middle of it, the code does not allow you to run the utility.
Exactly. Right. So they come to the PSC now and ask for relief, rate relief.
Right.
I'll say that the base rate, it didn't have an increase in the base rate for almost 10 years. So we were operating on the same base rate for 10 years. But when this infrastructure came in and the completion to propane, we now had to start paying
Somebody
Vital.
had to pay for it.
Yes.
Listen to yourselves out there. That's you.
Okay, so the utility came before the commission, laid out the rate, and we have only thus far utilized up to the $87 million. We have not looked at that additional cost as yet.
Right.
So this base rate that we just got is partially the infrastructure. That increase is the infrastructure cost.
But that's what you looked at, which is reflected now in the new base rate.
New base rate.
Okay. So everybody knows that.
So the decision was made to put the plant in, to do the conversion. The commission over the years have asked the utility to change the generators. So you had a choice.
Right.
But when oil was so high and the LEAC was so high, they decided that the easiest way, the shortest way to bring relief was to change to propane.
Right. And the other part of the issue was, in essence, kicking the can down the road and whistling by the graveyard.
Yes.
So you were still using massive amounts of quantities, very inefficiently, going up in the air, and you out there did see a decrease. But the fundamental structural problem of the running of the utility and how they do it was still at fault.
Still at fault. And before we get into that, I also want to continue with this rate. What we put in the rate, there was an interim base rate that we put in place. We haven't put that final base rate in place. It's an interim base rate.
Right.
Because WAPA has to go to the market.
Right, and they can't service debt.
They can't service the debt. So we had to provide a 1.5 for them to cover their debt.
Right.
The debt coverage. But the commissioner have heard the cries of the ratepayers.
Right.
So what the commission did is put a rate in place. Any consumer using 250 kilowatts or below
Right.
did not get an increase.
Right. And that was the little guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are the people who we have been hearing, the people who are on this fixed income, the elderly
Fixed
people.
income, or on Social Security, and all
of
the
that.
other anxieties.
So the commission heard that and structured the rate to make sure that these individuals that utilize 250 kilowatts per month or lower didn't get a great increase.
Well, not only that, I want the public to understand, to avoid the challenge of what you did, you were allowed to distribute the rate.
Yes.
You were giving them the bottom line of what they wanted. You decided and made a social decision, and
Yes.
that's what it was, to do it the way you did.
We did it.
Okay.
And then, as we discussed earlier, that rate is now spread across anybody using above
Right.
that. And then we have the rate for commercial, the commercial rate. The commercial rate that we have that was approved, and the utility used this a monthly at 800 kilowatts. Anybody using 800 kilowatts or above. And you have your small commercial, and this is small commercial, and that rate went up 19%.
Wow. Okay.
Went up 19%. And the small commercial user, again, we do it at 800, and then it goes up. You have the phase 2 and the phase 3 users, and basically that's what we did. We spread it across there. And as you mentioned so eloquently, when I go to the supermarket, we're going to see that.
Yes.
So that is why we make sure that those at the lower end didn't get that increase.
Understand. Everybody out there, keep your seatbelts on. You're on 93.5, and I'm here with the Director of the Public Service Commission. We'll be back in a minute. All right, and we are back, everybody, and the two of us here are enjoying ourselves discussing. Matter of fact, the off-air discussions would be more interesting for you. But we would have to have a bleeper. Bleep, 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 bleep. In any event, I'm here with Donald Dux Cole, and he's the Executive Director of the Public Service Commission. Now, did we finish all of the castor oil there that we were passing out with reference to all of the rates?
Yes, the base rate went up 5 cents.
Right.
That's what it is. It went up basically 5 cents, and that again included that infrastructure for the propane and the management cost. There's a management cost associated with that, though.
Right.
Operating and management, plus the cost of paying back what those guys invested in there.
Right. And it also, everybody, if there was a lack of judgment, and we're going to repeat it, on the part of the utility, understand that the mandate of the Public Service Commission, Mr. Dux Cole does not go to the office over at WAPA and direct people what to do or make decisions. They have a board. Now, I want to ask another question, which the public really tries to understand, and I try to explain to the public many times, this issue of a government that is not meeting its obligations. Meaning for the utility, and obviously when you're looking at rate making, you also have got to look at the fact that they're not being paid in many respects, particularly from the independent instrumentalities. I think the hospitals owe some $40 million. And we also have our street lights. They're not being paid for. I think we're handling that now. Talk to me, or talk to the audience, what that does to the utility as far as their maintenance of their equipment and, again, their infrastructure and the challenges that you have with reference to rate making, knowing that you cannot run the utility, but what you're facing when you have to increase the rates. And is any of this reflected in this base rate?
A portion of it is, and it is that section that we dealt with, the 250 kilowatt hours.
Right.
What happened when the utility doesn't receive a full rate? They project sales of X amount of megawatts of power. And they get 75% of that in rate return. That other 25% doesn't come in.
Right.
you have a debt service to meet.
Sure.
If you can't pay the bondholders, we're in trouble.
Right.
You can't maintain the utility, the generators, and you explained earlier about the vehicle.
Right.
If you drive your vehicle and you don't change the oil,
Right. You don't even get to the gas station.
you can't move.
Lights out.
That's it.
Car stops.
And what we have faced over the years, because of the utility not receiving from its larger customer, the government, and the instrumentalities, because the government is basically up to date. The central government.
They are.
The central government is up to date, but the utility, the semi-autonomous agency, the autonomous agency, the hospitals,
Right.
the two major hospitals, you don't get that money, so you can't do what? Take that engine down and do preventative maintenance.
Right.
When you run those generators, they tell you after 10,000 hours, you got to take it down. Because if you don't take it down, it's going to come down by itself.
But let me talk about the predicament that the government is in, and I'm talking about now, let's just talk about WAPA. You know out there that there are certain sensitive services that cannot be turned off. If you don't pay your bill, and everybody knows, your lights are off. Now, there is no way that they could turn the lights off at the hospitals. That would be life and property, okay? So this is the predicament we're in. And as Dux and I are talking about this, and later on, probably Dux and I will talk about it a little bit out, it is the same predicament that the general government is in right now, okay? In other words, they have to service debt. What the PSC did with WAPA, they gave them this increase so they could become more efficient.
Right.
What the government now is doing, and we're talking about our general government, okay,
right,
is now doing, having to borrow in some cases to meet payroll.
Payroll, yeah.
And that is unhealthy. And that is the decision that both the executive and legislative branch has to decide. I talked about kicking the can down the road. This is where we are today. Now, this governor is not at fault. I want to make it clear. The governor and I have disagreements on many issues, but he is inheriting a government that has had a champagne appetite and a beer pocketbook for 40 years. And you and I served in there.
Yes.
And many times we even saw where these major changes were made, am I correct?
Yes.
To the GERS. Back in 1984, the legislature, without being able to handle, again, the unfunded liability, kept giving more benefits and more benefits. Now, everybody out there will understand that the legislature will move on these kind of issues very close to an election year. And for those of us that would vote against these things, and former Senator Lorraine Berry, the late Senator Lorraine Berry, and I did not support these things. But we were the bad guys, weren't we?
Yeah.
So everybody understand that many of the problems that you're seeing that the PSC is dealing with is a result of what we would call collateral damage.
Yes. And Mr. Redfield, I want to input something that is critical here when we deal with the hospitals.
Right.
We have a law in the Virgin Islands that you can't turn a sick person away at the hospital.
Absolutely.
It's called uncompensated care.
Right.
So we can't turn them away. So the government is now supposed to provide that funding. They're not getting that uncompensated care funding.
That's correct.
Thus, they are unable to pay their WAPA bill.
Right. And
so
the money is coming out of the general fund. And you know, just recently, along with you, with, again, WAPA, we had a potential of having a rotating outage during Thanksgiving.
Yes, well, Thanksgiving. I live in the district of St. Thomas, St. John. And I want to interject right now what WAPA is doing and what the commission over the years have asked WAPA to do. Couldn't compel because we can't manage them, but they are now come to the table. We are now going to change out those old generators in St. Thomas.
Now,
we have gotten to the point.
Tell them why. Because they have to run, right, at peak power.
Yeah.
And when you have the fluctuation of demand, you want to be able to downscale it. You don't want to have that great big generator pumping costs in the air, right?
Right.
And fuel.
We have renewable energy on the grid. These old generators, when the intermittency happens with the with the renewables, when the clouds come over and the photovoltaics can't send the electricity, you have to have the ability to ramp up.
Absolutely.
These old generators can't ramp up.
No.
So moving into the future, we're getting, well, WAPA is getting some smaller generators. We call them rice engine, reciprocal engine, where they are able to now, as soon as that intermittency hit, boom.
Kick off.
It takes off. And
just
then
like
boom.
you had a transfer switch.
Yes, it just happens and it goes like that. But WAPA has concerns with these engines, and they have cost us a lot of money.
Yes.
A lot of money. And let's go back to the car that we use again. WAPA has generators older than me. Some of them probably older than you.
Yes. Not quite.
Yeah. And we talk about BTUs.
Right.
Heat rate.
Right. And that's money, everybody out there.
Heat rate.
Don't just talk with BTUs, but that's money.
The heat rate of these engines, they operate at an efficiency with heat rate. So the heat, the new engines that we're going to get will operate at a 10,000 BTUs.
Right.
The heat. The old ones we have are operating at 15 and 16,000. That difference is fuel.
Right.
And that has been a major problem in WAPA.
Right.
The inability to get those new engines. We have set a path forward to change the engines in St. Thomas.
All right, let me go a little bit deeper into this. Because, and follow us out there. The legislature, by law, we have a charge at the pump called the tax.
Yeah, the gas tax.
Gas tax. And you see that every time when you go to the pump, how much it is. Now,
14
it is
cents.
14 cents. Now, it was my understanding that the legislature gave WAPA 7 cents.
No.
No.
All of it.
All of it.
14
now,
cents.
But it's been reversed.
No, he didn't get reversed.
Good.
Didn't
So
get reversed.
are they still going to the market again with
Yes.
that revenue stream?
And that is the reason why we're able to get these new engines. Because
gotcha.
that revenue stream have been set up.
Well, God help us. Hopefully
5 years it's been there. It's accumulated over $15 million.
Good.
And that is what they're using. And once it stays there, then we can get new generators.
But you understand, with the challenges that the central government has right now, there always is a temptation to play with that.
Well,
Just like it was with the Insurance Guarantee Fund. They're using that now, which normally is not to be used that way. But we're trying to give you an overview that hopefully that you can understand. Nobody's trying to talk down to you or up to you.
But
Got to have this information.
Yeah,
This is
understand
what
the process and what the commission has to do. And that is why I can't get people to serve in the commission.
Yes.
It's a very difficult job.
Well, how would you like to go through the hazing at the legislature?
Oh, my goodness.
In any event, let's take a break. We'll be back in again in a couple of minutes. Keep your seatbelts on and keep the castor oil on. We will be back in a minute. All right, and we are back on, and you're on Caribbean Country 93.5, and I'm on with the Honorable Doug Cole, who is the director of the Public Service Commission. Now, we got a brainstorm, and while we were off the air, of, again, breaking down. And, again, Dux has a way of making the complex simple, and that is important for us because even me with rate making, when I was on there, going to school and understanding it and head scratching and blah, 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 finally figured it out. But let's go back to the car, which is the base rate, and let's go back to the fuel,
Which is the LEAC.
which is the LEAC, and let's talk about it in context of the investments that now are being made by your increase in the rates to be able to become more efficient.
Well, when we use the car, you have to take that car to get overhaul. And if you didn't take it, you're going to have to sometimes stall on the road. You might have to pay a wrecker.
Right.
Or you might have to push it when you run out of gas into the gas
Now,
station.
you may be you're the Public Service Commission. You're not a wrecker, but you may be pushing right now,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
I have to help them push it in there. So what is happening, we have to I said earlier, the commission cannot allow the utility to fail.
Right. If it does, the lights
If
go
it
off.
fails, the
here,
lights go
everybody.
off, and the
Right.
territory is in serious problem. And when I say the territory, I'm talking about the private and the public.
Right.
The
And we would
engine
be
of
under-
government
right.
runs to power.
Correct.
We need safe, cheap, and reliable power,
Affordable.
affordable power. And businesses, when they come into this territory, they want to know that they have a stable source of electricity, cheap, and reliable.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this car where we can utilize it efficiently. But
Right.
this one that is running is like a 54 Chevy.
Right. It's it's a jalopy.
Yeah, 54 Chevy, and it gets 10 miles on the gallon.
Right.
I want a 2017
Right.
Chevy that gets me 50 miles on the
Right.
gallon.
But let me also praise Gustav James, who is the Commissioner of Public Works. When he used to be on the radio before he got his appointment again to public service, or not, to
Public Works.
Public Works Commissioner, he kept talking about this. And I know his influence, again, on the WAPA board.
Yeah.
He sensitized them to this. Now, it wasn't as if they were stupid. They understood. But I think, as you explained earlier, with these utilities, whether they're phone company or whether they are a
Power.
utility, they have made investments in the past that have not been paid for yet.
Right.
Now, we have a new era. We have the ability, right, to do fracking. We're talking about the supply of
fracking, yeah.
horizontal drilling.
Yeah.
The United States now is the biggest country with reserves than any place in the world, right?
Right.
So it's changed. It's changed the demographics. It's changed the political situation. It has changed foreign policy. And here we are, the little Virgin Islands, responding to many of these things
Right.
that we have never been subjected to before. And the big question marks, where is it going to go?
Where is it going to go?
And we're doing a good job
Well, I think we're doing it. We're doing a good job,
with what we have facing us.
and we have to ask the public to come along with us. Because in the end, when we reach that goal, we're going to achieve the objective that we set out to achieve. Cheap, affordable, reliable electricity.
Right. But it's a moving target. Am I correct?
It is.
That you have got to be very dapper and responsive. And these issues generally are planned years in advance. A utility does that. And then when you have major changes in the market or cost of fuel or situations that we did not address when we should have, now you are paying the piper.
And so Redfield, one of the things that the commission looked at when we put this rate in place is that the price of fuel is cheaper now.
Right.
So let's use whatever savings we can to put this infrastructure in place.
Right.
The propane that's in place right now, we do a hedging. So we're hedging on the propane.
You're putting an insurance policy
Yes.
on any large spike.
And a large spike.
Right.
So we're saying for the next 5 years,
Right.
our fuel
You'll know.
should be hovering around 14, maybe sooner or later down to 10 cents a kilowatt hour.
Right.
But we still have to pay for that infrastructure cost to house that fuel.
Sure.
And that is what WAPA did when they made that decision. And again, the PSC didn't have any authority. They made it to invest. I think when the director said that we're going to get a 30% reduction,
Right.
I think he meant after we paid for the infrastructure.
Devil is in the
Yeah,
detail.
after we pay for the infrastructure. We have to pay for that infrastructure, and it's amortized over a 10-year period. So that's, I have to tell the public, that is what the commission had to wrestle with
Right.
when we put this interim base rate in place. We had to pay for that infrastructure. And if we didn't, guess who was going to be suing us?
Yes.
Vital.
Sure. Absolutely.
Vital will be suing the Public Services Commission.
Right.
And we tried our darndest. We made the rate where those who use 250 or less do not get an increase, and then we spread the rate over the other users to accommodate that, a social decision that the commission looked at.
All right, let's broaden this a little bit. To my recollection, now we're talking about you folks on the Public Service Commission being proactive. You asked them to do a study, am I correct, on efficiency of the utility. Am I correct?
Yes, we did an IRP.
Okay,
An
now,
independent resource IRP, integrated resource plan.
right, and that had to do with employment levels, efficiency of the utility. Now, I want everybody to understand that they very cautiously, you did this, so you wouldn't be looking like you were running the utility. But you also clearly understood when the study took place and it was made public, which
Right.
it was, preemptively at one point, I don't know, somebody wasn't happy because they were all of a sudden had to respond. But at this nudging, they have been downsizing the utility.
They have.
Right.
They have
They
been
have
doing it.
come up with the idea that now the meters don't have to be read, but however, they still don't have the cell sites that they need.
Right.
But that was a very meaningful action on the part of the Public Service Commission. Your thoughts on it?
Very much so. The commission looks at all of these issues that you're talking about. Smart meter. The smart meters are in. The IRP. The IRP gave us a pathway into the future. You got to change these generators out. You got to bring these in. You have to bring renewables on the grid.
Great.
And you have to diversify your fuel source.
Right. And workforce requirements.
And then workforce. What happened when you brought the smart meters in, you're going to lose meter readers.
Sure.
Another social issue that you have to deal with.
Right.
WAPA in its management now have to configure its workforce. They also have to pay what we call OPEB charges, Mr. Redfield. People who have retired over the years.
Correct.
Still got to pay their retirement.
Sure.
Costs that associate with that. Health insurance has to be paid. So you got to be able to bring the staff. The staff has to be trained. They have cross-training, just like the telephone company, cross-training. So WAPA's management board went along with the IRP. We got the IRP, and we also have the ability to, the utility has to have the ability to look at these things in the future. And then bring it all together, and the commission is sitting there and saying, hey, we want to help you, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And
Right.
that's what we do. The other issue is the avoided costs.
Right.
We have businesses or utilities that want to come in and supplement. I think when you were there, you guys passed the small generation
Yes, we did.
legislation.
Oh. No, I wasn't there. It was after me.
Bent was the one.
Right.
Bent Lowitz. If someone believes that they can produce power at a cheaper rate and sell it to WAPA,
Buy it back.
and WAPA will get it. WAPA is the only entity that can sell power. You have to have an avoided cost. An avoided cost is, for those who don't understand, is what the utility pays to generate that 1 kilowatt of electricity. So when Redfield comes to me and says, well, I want to put in a 10 megawatt plant, I need to know your avoided cost, because I'm not going to buy, WAPA is not going to buy it from you if you're producing it more than it costs me to produce it.
not.
So we have an avoided cost in place. So we have before the commission certain issues where companies want to come in and provide electricity to WAPA. So that is there. The IRP is there. So we're moving. That nexus between the commission and the utility, I think, is working.
Right.
And is working well.
Now, let me ask you, if I was to give you a magic wand right now, and you had the ability to do whatever you wanted to do, I'm going to bring you into the legislative process at this point. What do you want now from the legislature to make your task easier? a smaller commission, a paid commission. Some of the thoughts that you have that you can't do on your own, but again, the Public Service Commission collectively has been thinking about.
Well, Mr. Redfield, I've been in the legislature. I've served in the legislature. I try to get legislation passed, and it's very difficult to do that. I believe we need a commission that needs paid commissioners. It's a lot of work.
Yes. No.
A lot of work, a lot of reading.
And I want you to mention to the public, 99% of the PSCs in the United States are paid.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when I used to go up,
To Nehru?
as a young guy like me at that time, and I looked very young, that was even when I was flying the seaplane, they would look at me because they would say, what are you, an aide? What are you? And when I would say, I am the chairman, they would fall on the floor.
Yeah.
Because these are very high-paid jobs. Now, you'll say, well, why is that? Well, that is because whether you know it or not, you're in the room here with Elf and Ducks. This is the most influential commission in the Virgin Islands,
yeah.
okay? It is literally got you in its arms. And the people you want there, you want them to know what the hell to do.
They're doing.
Right.
And what I've been trying to do is work with the legislature. We have to work. If we can't get full-time paid,
Right.
at least for the work or the preparation for when you have to prepare
Right.
for the meeting.
Yes. Well, that's the way they should pay senators.
Just a portion. That during that time,
Yes.
let's see if we can develop a scale
Yes.
rather than $75 a meeting.
Yes.
Okay? Compensate. You see all these things I have here? I mean, these are findings.
Yes, sure.
They got to read this stuff.
Of course, and not only read it, they've got to understand
comprehend what they're doing.
Okay?
They got to read and comprehend. Right. And when the consultants bring this to you and you sit down and you... Unit 23 at WAPA right now burns at a heat rate of 15,000 BTUs, and it costs...
Right.
You got to be able to understand what they're talking about in order to transfer that into a decision.
And do a decision.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's what it is. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So some form of compensation for that.
What else would you need? Do you need anything, or can they deal with this prickly issue of, again, being able to make broader decisions and still stay within the purview of not managing them?
Well, somewhere along the line, I think the legislation, Title 30 needs to be amended to, as I say, put a little bit more teeth in the commission.
Right.
We don't want to manage,
right,
but we want to be able to say, well, utility, you can't go out and commit the ratepayers of the territory for $100 million, right, and then just bring it and drop it in the lap of the public and say you have to do that.
And you have to do it.
And I have to do it.
And you do right
And if
now.
I don't, then you take me to court and sue me.
And you win.
Right. So somewhere along the line, we have to be able to enjoin WAPA.
Right.
And say, hey, listen, we understand what you're saying, but let us work with this thing collaboratively. Right. I don't want to manage WAPA, but I don't want to have to.
Well, indirectly with that study, and I said you did it very diplomatically, you gave them the tools to project themselves forward. The study, I understand, was very effective.
Yeah, the IRP was very effective.
And they are actually responding to this. But let me give somebody a little history. Now, everybody have some fun with this. Back in I believe it was 78, when I first came on the commission, if you'll recall, and it's always been an issue in the community, the sale of the South Shore plant.
Yeah.
Now, Holland was a hot shot at that point, and he was chairman of the commission. I decided to issue an order to stop the sale.
Right.
Now, everybody said, great, and it would have been great. But it went all the way to the federal courts. Mm-hmm. And this very issue of what you're talking about, of interfering with the management, even though it was a bad decision on their part, ruled in the favor of WAPA.
Yeah.
Okay, now, it got to the point where it was such a test that we had federal marshals and local marshals. The federal representing Holland,
yeah,
the local representing the government of the Virgin Islands out there. But it was finally resolved. And, of course, it did not get resolved to my satisfaction because the precedent that was set is what you're dealing with now. And also, that plant was sold to the Dominican Republic for like 5 cents on a dollar. Who knows where that money went to? And again, we have that problem, which you've been tussling with, and WAPA, that we really should move all of our generating facilities over to the South Shore. Am I correct?
I think that would be an excellent thing.
But did I reflect what happened accurately? If you ever looked at the record?
Yes, you did. But what has happened is we have just put millions of dollars of infrastructure right down there in WAPA.
Yes,
the propane plant, millions of dollars.
I understand.
And all of that would have to be removed, but there's a cost associated with that.
Yes.
There's a cost associated with that. And
but in fairness to WAPA, one of the issues was the emissions issue down there.
Right.
And, of course, Lime Tree wanting to keep that capacity. And, again, these are things that public really has trouble understanding, and I do as well, because we are governed by much of the stuff from Washington that has made things very
the EPA, we have to meet certain EPA standards. WAPA has to meet certain EPA standards. When you permit a generator, you have to go to the EPA, and it takes us an inordinate amount of time.
Or it can be turned off. Yeah. Let me give you another interesting story for everybody out there. When I was, what's that, 3 minutes? Well, let's cut this off, but I was going to talk to you about an interesting story. We'll talk about that later. Some closing thoughts on your part.
Well, I just want to thank you for having me here. Thank TV. We're going to play this.
Right. Committee.
So we can illuminate what the relationship between the public and the utility and what we represent. It's a balance. We can't allow the utility to be bankrupt, but we also cannot allow the utility, because it's a monopoly, to take advantage of the ratepayers. So that's where the commission comes in. And we understand the social issues, and we understand the issues that WAPA face in not collecting all the rate that they get. And they have a challenge. But all I want to do is let the public know that the commission is listening, and they understand the hardship both the utility and the community is facing. And we have to draw that balance.
Well, I always put to the bank, you're like a lawyer in a divorce court. And you are in an awkward position. And I want to thank you for being here. I do not want you to be a stranger. Anybody else that you would like to bring on from time to time, you're welcome to do it. I think this is productive. And to you out there that have been listening to this broadcast, try to really watch this thing, and I think we've had a fair and objective look. You may not like it, okay? Nobody likes to have an increase. However, at least you know how the process works and the challenges that you have and the utility have. Am I correct?
Yeah, yes, and the purpose that is put in place. Again, a community cannot survive without cheap, reliable power. And we're moving towards that.
Right.
WAPA is in the IRP plan. We're going to put new generators in St. Thomas, and we're going to then take care of St. Croix. St. Croix has been good because we had put over $30 million in the heat recovery boiler here in St. Croix over the years. So we're fixing up St. Thomas, and we then going to, whatever we need to do in St. Croix has to be done. The whole family, and we always used to say this in the legislature, when one member of the family is hurting, the entire family hurts. So we need to take care of that.
Also, if the one member is hurting the legislature, then what happens is it reflects on its ability to make decisions. But I think that we had a nice balance, making the complex simple. We also had an opportunity, you and I, to discuss how this very challenge is also so similar to what is happening in the government of the
central
Virgin
government.
Islands.
Yes.
And we have ourselves probably the biggest challenge since I have ever been here in the Virgin Islands. And out there, it's very serious. And what you have to do is allow the process to take place. And this is the time for you to speak up on issues that decisions are going to be made for you.
And we have some serious decisions to make. We have a lot of stuff going on. And I know the legislature and the governor right now have to make some decisions in terms of financing here in the territory and how we're going to continue moving this.
Well, again, and it's the balance between the private and public sector, okay, and these things, you tussle with a lot of these decisions on distributing of rates. It also has to do with the survival of the private sector. And again, as I say, they have their hands full. My outlook on this, and I will talk to it a little bit with Noel Loftus, who's going to come on and is a member of the WAPA board on some of these issues.
With what we served. Thank you.
Great interview. We'll be back here on 93.5.
Straight talk.